Thank you, Dick. So I want to start just by thanking Robert and Melissa, the Renewable and Natural Resources Foundation, for putting this on. It's been really interesting. I've enjoyed your all's questions very much. It's obviously a well-read group, and sorry about the lag in the middle of the afternoon, but we'll see if we can make our way to the break here. And my role, Sharon talked about the Southwest. We've heard a lot about California. And my role is to bring you, I guess, a little further up to speed on what's happening in the Rocky Mountains, particularly around this idea of sustainability. And I've been fascinated as I've listened to the speakers how, even though we didn't actually get together on a call and discuss this, we certainly have converged on some ideas here, I think, today around groundwater and ag and some other issues. I think what's interesting is I was trying to sit back there and think about the discussions that have occurred from your all's point of view is how much the focus on sustainability to this point has really been upon human needs. And, when I think about sustainability, I think about that a little bit differently. So I think that's an interesting place where we are. The other interesting place where I am is by the time you get to late afternoon, a lot of comments have already been made that, when I was sitting on the plane last night thinking I knew what I was going to say, they've been made. So I'll be ad-libbing a little bit up here, and we'll see where we get to by the end of this and whether we get to the break or not. So the Rocky Mountains, we're sitting there on the spine of the country, and the major rivers coming out of the Rockies, right? We got the Columbia and the Missouri and the Snake, the Rio Grande, the Platte. All of these are coming off of that high headwaters there, either heading on the east side of the Continental Divide or the west side. And really, we sit sort of perched on a pretty delicate balance in the Rocky Mountain states that's different than what you've heard around California and Southwest. And the reason for that is that we're sitting, for example, on the Colorado River. Well, I'll just say Colorado as a whole. We're sitting there, and there's 18 other states and Mexico down below us waiting for their water. And, while we may consider it ours, no, they consider it theirs. And so we're really in this very interesting place. And Buzz talked about the compacts that we use to allocate that water across states. But it adds to the tension. It adds to our conservatism around water resources supplies. And we've heard all the different tensions that are out there this morning, tribes and drought and growth and energy production. And they're all there, same ones in the Rocky Mountains. I really can't add a lot to that. I'll put a little finer point on it. What I would say about climate change, and I'll talk a bit about it, is certainly that multiplies the threat on top of all of those other things that are happening. We've got climate change. So we're sitting in this arid region, limited resources. We're trying to spread that resource across human needs. Sustainability? Well, I guess I will argue that we can aspire to sustainability in most of our watersheds, but I think many of our water supplies are not going to be sustainable within the timescales that we're most concerned with, right? Our water management that we're dealing right now, particularly groundwater systems, but I'll have to say that a lot of our surface water systems are also highly stressed. So if your only definition of sustainability is are we going to have water for people, yeah, we're sustainable, okay? But I think it's a more complicated discussion than that. I mean, clearly, there's a divide between how engineers, economists, ecologists think about sustainability, right? There's also a decision scale that matters a lot. So if you're an engineer for a water municipality, the way you think about sustainability is, do we have enough water for our city, right? That's your metric. If you're an ecologist, you might be thinking about an entire river basin, right? How do we sustain the species that also depend upon that water? If you're an economist, what the heck? I mean, who knows what economists think? But they tend to, they look really big, I guess, is what you'd say about economists. But I'll talk about sustainability in the Rocky Mountains kind of broadly. Then I want to narrow in on two basins that I know pretty well, been working on for a long time, the South Platte and the Ogallala. I'll kind of try to deep dive us there in those two. Why? Because they illustrate two really different situations in terms of this sustainability equation. I think, fundamentally the question that we're asking and grappling with here is, do we have the available water resources in the West to meet human needs while still maintaining those ecosystems that we depend upon? To me, that's really the question. I guess secondarily, and this has come up several times today, is And by the way, should this be purely a market-driven consideration, or are there other things and other ways that we need to think about this? So you've seen these maps. I'm going to show you several maps and try to show you some pictures of the Rocky Mountains as well. And this is the annual precipitation for the U.S. And what I've scribed on there, you see that line going right down the middle of the Great Plains, right? The 100th meridian is what that is. And Wallace Stegner wrote the book Beyond the 100th Meridian, where he talked about John Wesley Powell's career as an explorer and all of the great. It's a great book if you haven't read it. And 100th meridian obviously is an imaginary line, but it describes that point where you cross into the zone of aridity in the United States, right? Where you go to the area where evaporation exceeds precipitation, right? And that has big implications for runoff. Now, Stegner, I don't know how, you guys seem like a really well-read group. I'm appreciating you all a lot. His essay of Thoughts in a Dry Land, Stegner said, to appreciate nature in the arid West, you've got to get over the color green, right? It's not a green place. And Stegner was right. It's, we have our green spots, but if you add Nevada and Arizona into those 6 Rocky Mountain states and just take those 8 western interior states, and you've got the driest part of our country. Dick mentioned this. You've got the area of the country that has the most federally owned lands. Nevada is 85% federally owned, right? Colorado's 36%. So a lot of federal ownership. I think that it does have significant repercussions. And then it also is one of the fastest growing areas in the country, right? 6 of the 10 fastest states in the U.S. are in the Colorado River Basin. And we just heard from Sharon, what the heck how are we going to deal with that? So lots of increasing competition. We know that. It's a limited supply. What I would say is that, I guess if there's a good side to this, is that drought and aridity are really the story of the West, right? So our water allocation systems, we grew up with a pretty clear concept of scarcity and limits. And that's really where we are now. We've developed a resource. Now we're trying to figure out how to allocate that developed resource to meet these expanding needs and this intensified competition for water resources. So I do think the historical context is really important, and Buzz, I think, gave us a great context for that. I don't need to say too much. Our gold rush in the Rockies started 10 years after the California gold rush. We got after it in 1859, and I think the same sort of principles that came from California and came from the miners got embodied in our water law, and yet it evolved over a long period of time. I was sitting back there smiling while Buzz was talking. I don't know if he saw me. I was thinking first, if I gave that talk in Colorado, actually, even if I gave it in D.C., I would be, probably, if not fired, I'd be drugged through the streets. Prior appropriation is sacred in Colorado. Water rights community believe in prior. In fact, Buzz, you can say anything you want. If you start by saying prior appropriation is sacred, then you can say anything. But if you start where you are, man, you are going to get killed out of my country. So what's interesting, and Buzz may have a different point of view about this, David Shore, the legal scholar who's written quite a bit about prior appropriation, his theory was that the Rocky Mountain states abolished riparian law during their development and instituted prior appropriation in order to curb speculation by moneyed interests. Really, this idea of distributed justice and water being used only for beneficial use and keeping the monopolists out of the West. I don't know if you'll agree with that, Buzz, or not, but I thought it was a pretty interesting point of view that he has on prior. Obviously, the mining phase, while it lasted a long time, it really wasn't the history of water development in the West. Agricultural water development quickly followed the miners. A lot of folks from the Midwest realized they'd a lot rather grow vegetables and beef for miners than to bang their way through the rocks. And so we started developing the water resource in Colorado really right with the mining. So our earliest water rights are 1859, 1860 water rights. And actually, many of our streams, like the South Platte, were fully appropriated by 1870, 80. We got it done pretty quick there. And then, of course, we began to make the adjustments. But when John Wesley Powell wrote his report in 1879 on the lands of the arid region, where he went out and came back with his report, he envisioned this idea of a perpetually agrarian West, right, where the principal constraint was going to be the amount of water that was available for irrigation. And certainly Powell, and by the way, that's the one-armed man on the horse down on the right is my picture of John Wesley, but Powell did foresee this heritage of conflict that would result from over-appropriation and short-sighted institutional frameworks. He saw that, but what he probably didn't foresee, I don't believe, was the rapid urbanization that occurred in the West after World War II, nor did he see our insistence upon environmental protection and recreational opportunities that would come later in the 70s. So he got it partially right, is what I would say. And then, of course, as we developed in the West, we got to this reclamation era, right, where actually Mark Reisner's book, Cadillac Desert, is sort of the ultimate tome on that spirit of the reclamation era, right, where we got in there and we built these amazing reservoir projects across the West. Why? In order to facilitate the development of the West. That's why it was done, right? We built amazing projects. And I would say that, perhaps that spirit lives on today in the ambitions of Las Vegas and Salt Lake City and Denver. I think we still have part of that reclamation spirit, and actually we're still calling for some of those big projects. Kansas is talking about refilling the Ogallala with a pipeline from the Missouri right now. They're thinking seriously about that. So, it's not over yet, folks. We're gonna work our way through. I don't think I need to say a lot about prior appropriation. Certainly all the Rocky Mountain states have embraced some aspect of prior appropriation. What I would say, since I'm up here and Buzz is not, is that the way that we see prior appropriation in Colorado at least is that it is actually quite effective in allocating scarcity. We know, maybe it's not fair, but we know who's got the senior water right? We got that dialed in, who gets it. And so there's no doubt about how we're going to allocate scarcity. We've got that part. So, we can talk about the fairness of it later, Buzz. So basically what the settlers did in the West is they came in, this is kind of a classic view of what they did. They put these diversion structures across rivers and streams and tributaries. You can see the two head gates there on the side, then beyond that's the canal. And we did that virtually on every stream and tributary across the West, that we could put that water to beneficial use. The idea of beneficial use early on was you had to divert that water. There was no such thing as beneficial use being within the stream channel in the West. It was all about diversion and moving it out. So from a modern day perspective, when you look at those headworks there, what we've created, of course, are fish passage barriers, and we've also created a water right system that allows a water right at that diversion point, if they're senior, to sweep that river. So again, from sitting here in 2015, is that the way we devise it? No, probably not. It's the way we evolved. I guess what I would say about surface water appropriations and sustainability, really from either the diversion or the consumptive use perspective, you're not going to exceed the renewable supply for very long. There may be some time frame that you can do that if you've got reservoirs like we do on the Colorado River, but at some point, this comes into balance. The question really is what's left for the ecosystem, right? If we can sweep the river, if we have everything fully appropriated, that becomes the problem. And what's happened in the West is really first the trappers, then the miners, then the loggers, then agriculture, then the point source dischargers. We all greatly perturbed these western river systems. And so I might stand up here and argue actually that restoration should be our goal rather than sustainability on many of these river systems in the West as we think about renewable natural resources. Okay, so the topic of ag just keeps coming up. Why is that? Why do we keep talking about ag? This is natural resources. And Sharon said this, and I think everybody else has too. The water's in ag in the West, right? So the problems and the solutions are embedded in agriculture. And I think that's where we are today, is trying to figure that out. And when you look at, this is all of the continental western states, and you can see those bars, and the green is that fraction that's ag, and the blue is the M&I, or the municipal and industrial water, and west-wide, it's over 70%. By the way, that's the same figure globally. About 70% of the humans' diversion of water goes into food production. It takes a lot of water to grow food. That's just the reality. The interesting thing is when you start thinking about solutions and markets, the value of that water in agriculture tends to be about an order of magnitude less than the value of that water in other uses, industrial uses, municipal, etc. So we have to keep that in mind. And this chart, I don't need to say too much about. It's really just the data for the Rocky Mountains. The interesting thing about it is it shows, again, in terms of those 6 Rocky Mountain states, the amount of water used for irrigation in a percentage basis is very high. You're looking Wyoming, 95% of the water they withdraw is for irrigation. Montana, 93. Pretty interesting. And then that last column there is the percent of total water withdrawals from groundwater. And you see huge variation from 30% in Montana to 44% in New Mexico. As a whole, the Rocky Mountain states are more surface water driven than some of the other states that we've talked about. But our groundwater story is fascinating, and I could spend an hour or two just talking about that today, but I won't, I promise. So I will talk a little bit more about agriculture. And this is, it's interesting to look at this from a whole nation standpoint. And what you're seeing in that map is little blue dots, and each blue dot represents 10,000 irrigated acres, okay? So as you look at the map, hey, I can see the Ogallala states, I can see the Central Valley that Thomas talked about, you can see the lower Mississippi Valley, you see the Snake River there cutting across Idaho, and then lots of little dots all across the country where irrigation is occurring. This is fascinating, though. If you look at the differential, so USDA does an ag census every 5 years. So the last one was 2012. The one before that was 2007. If you look at the irrigated acres in the U.S., 2007 to 2012, about the same. Not quite 56 million acres of irrigation, right? But what do you see? West, lots of red dot. Each dot is 1,000 acres that has come out of irrigation during that period of time. Each blue dot is 1,000 acres that's been added. Okay, so what do you see there? Lots in the west, blue dots in the east. You're seeing a shift. Now, 2012 is a dry year in the west, so we've got to be a little bit careful there. But what we're seeing, I think, is a long-term trend. Those irrigated acres have maxed in the west. There's just no doubt about that. I mean, look at California. You were at 10 million acres of irrigation a few years back in 2007. You're now at 8 million. Nebraska has passed you in irrigated acres. And so we're seeing a trend towards irrigation in the east. Why? Because they also have droughts, and they also want to firm up their ability to produce crops economically. Okay, so what could possibly make this situation more interesting, more challenging? How about rising temperatures, right? I mean, let's lay that on top of an already scarce water situation. And I've got a picture there of Reclamation's recent study on climate risk assessment for irrigation demand and evaporation. And not surprisingly, right, you put more energy in the system in the form of heat, and you see greater free surface evaporation, you see greater transpiration from plants. What does that mean? It means greater potential demand, okay? Not absolute demand, it's potential demand. And of course, you see that there's going to be impacts on the supply side as well. And this idea of warming in the West, the models are converging, I think. It's a matter of how fast and how high, where does this go? But what we're seeing, so this chart is actually looking at the convergence of the models out to 2050 and 2080, and the Southwest is kind of in the bullseye of warming out there. And there's going to be more warming in the summer when we're growing plants, perhaps less warming in the winter according to models, okay? But the confidence around this is getting pretty high. And what we're starting to see, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this or not, but the droughts that have been occurring in the last 10 years, 2012 drought we had in the West, the 11 drought in Texas, the recent drought in the Midwest, they're happening faster, more intensely than they did in the past. Instead, it's those additional degrees of warming that seem to be driving that. They're hotter droughts. We're seeing this in the Colorado River Basin as well. And so the good thing, if you're in the Rocky Mountains, is it's all about the snowpack, right? It renews each year. It's sustainable. It comes back every winter. It snows, and every summer it melts, and that's the water supply that we have to work with. But with warming overlaid on that, what it looks like is that more of the seasonal moisture is going to come as rain. Okay, and that has implication. Those mountains are the water towers. They hold the water up there until we need it for crop production. It melts off, and it's a wonderful thing. And actually, this idea of western runoff occurring earlier has already been documented. In Colorado, we're seeing our runoff coming about 1 to 3 weeks earlier. I think this has some water rights implications that we haven't totally figured out, but I can tell you it certainly has implications to the way our systems are going to be managed, the way our reservoirs can be managed, and how we deal with that late summer demand, which is problematic. And the reason it's problematic, if you look at a natural western stream, this is how snowpack, really our rivers run. This is a hydrograph of an undammed tributary stream to the South Platte, and what you see is 2/3 of the runoff comes off in literally a 2-month period, right? It gets warm, the snow melts, boom, it comes off. And that's why we had to build reservoirs in the West, by the way, to deal with this phenomenon. But change in the snowpack, and Doug mentioned this as well, really has some of us scratching our heads on how we're going to deal with this. And this is, again, some model data, Milley et al., looking at changes where essentially they couple the climate models with hydrologic models. They look at what the projected changes in runoff can be. Sharing bad news for Arizona and Doug, the models are really converging on California, Nevada, places like that where there's a lot of confidence. That's what that hashing is showing, is that runoff changes are going to come into play in the next 30 to 50 years. We'll be dealing with this. And, I showed you that earlier hydrograph, and really what you're talking about is a shift to where the runoff hydrograph is earlier and the peak isn't as high, okay? So now if warming and spring frosts are consistent, maybe we deal with this problem by shifting the agricultural growing season a little earlier. But I'll tell you what we're seeing right now. We're seeing warmer springs. We had an amazingly warm spring in the Rockies this year, but we still had a late frost. And so, for example, in the Grand Valley of Colorado, the peaches bloomed 3 weeks earlier than they'd ever bloomed, all time. But we had a typical frost date. Well, that's a wreck, man. That doesn't work. And so, how that's going to play out, I think, remains to be seen. So, storage is going to be an important part of how we cope with climate change and warming in the western United States. Okay, so I promised Sharon I wouldn't talk about the Colorado River. That was hers. I'm not going to say a word about it. I'm going to talk deep dive into 2 basins that I think are, they're 2 that I've spent a lot of time in. They're fascinating basins. I could talk for hours about both of them, but I won't. South Platte in northeast Colorado, I think, illustrates some interesting points about sustainability. And really, it's a story of population growth and land use change, all right? So the South Platte is that river that starts in the mountains up above Denver. Denver is where it is because of the South Platte, runs out to northeast Colorado. 85% of Colorado's population and its economy is in this basin. It's the #1 agricultural basin. It used to have 1 million acres of irrigated ground. That's where all of our animal feeding is. It's interesting in that it's a basin that's significantly augmented with Colorado River water. And I just realized I'm talking about the Colorado River, Sharon. Sorry, but we are moving water under the Rocky Mountains or over it in some cases from the Colorado to the South Platte. And that has some really interesting implications for sustainability as well as we think about the stress on the Colorado. But it's a basin where we're augmenting with about 500,000 acre-feet of groundwater and almost 500,000 acre-feet of Colorado River water. And we are amazingly productive in that basin. And so this is USGS's map of the system. You see the alluvial aquifer in brown. I'll mention that in just a minute. You see all these squiggly kind of, well, I don't know if you can see them or not. The map shows all these squiggly light blue lines. Those are all the canals that we've constructed on the system. We have totally changed these systems. I mean, man's footprint on these systems is amazing. And I love to look at these old pictures of these basins. This is actually a painting of the South Platte in 1873. We're not going back there. Ain't going to happen, right? I mean, we have altered these systems to the point that really it's illogical, I would say, to talk about sustainability in terms of pre-development conditions. I mean, you can if you want to, but I just think everything about the systems have so changed that would really be put unattainable standards on it. We need to deal with the reality of what is, and I think that pre-development conditions can tell us a lot. They can help us understand how the ecology developed and how we may want to preserve the ecology, but we're not going back there. And the reason, this is a series of 3 maps of that Denver area. So on your left is what Denver looked like in 1960. In the middle is 2000, and then on your right is what that Front Range area is going to look like. The red is urban growth in 2040. So the South Platte is running right through that, right? So urban growth and sprawl are the dominant drivers. And that, we have to think about sustainability within that context, in my opinion. And what's interesting, from a water resources planning and management point of view, if you're in the West, what you have to deal with is this issue of variability and drought. So this chart here is showing the South Platte at a gauge downstream of Denver. And what you see is the line for the median. Average is twice the median, but you see, like Doug said, this average just doesn't exist. So you're trying to plan for that growth on a system that's highly, highly variable. Every year looks a little bit different, and some of the highest flow years follow the drought years. In fact, that's how we break drought. So a water supply manager to a city has to supply that water every year, no matter what those conditions are, right? So drought is certain. The timing is uncertain, right? That is really the challenge that we're dealing with. And I think that plays out both in human and environmental sustainability, right? Because what happens to these ecosystems under those kind of extreme conditions when the humans need everything that's there, right? These ecosystems evolved with very variable flows, and the fish that lived in these systems, for example, extremely resilient fish that knew how to go to these refuge pools and survive and breed and go to the next year. Our water rights system allows us in those dry times to completely sweep the river. In fact, in the South Platte, from Denver to Nebraska line, I count 13 places along the river that are considered dry up points. And those are, from a water management point of view, those dry up points are really important because you can't exchange water up above them. They sort of limit what you can do in terms of markets and trades. And it's the way the system developed, okay? And now we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. So, what does the future portend? More people. Does that mean more water? Well, our water managers think it does. Right now, we're water planning in Colorado. We just turned in our state water plan, and municipal demands just in the South Platte are expected to double in the next 15, 20 years, okay? So, without some interventions, right, which in our area, there's really three possibilities. One is the growth is constrained to the water supply. 2, we take the water out of agriculture. Or 3, we dig another tunnel and get some more Colorado River water. Those are about our options there. We do a lot of talk about big pipelines from rivers to the east of us, but really that's probably not going to happen. So how are we going to get there in the South Platte? How do we get to sustainability? All of these things have been mentioned a lot. Demand management is a huge part of it. So we can continue to have our supply dreams. And for the most part, supply augmentation in a basin like the South Platte is really, at this point, yes, there are reservoirs planned for the basin. They will probably get built. For the most part, I think what we'll do is we'll enlarge reservoirs. We'll modernize the system. We'll create efficiencies through really the way that we operate our reservoirs and our systems. By the way, the water is going to come out of agriculture, right? And this whole issue of efficiency and conservation. And by the way, in Colorado, we separate out efficiency and conservation. We taught in agriculture, and I can say more about that later if I have time. But it's going to be part of the solution. But I would like to. We really haven't talked enough about water quality and ecosystem needs today. And I think part of the solution in the South Platte, like all these basins, is really looking at that whole watershed, right? The watershed, the river is integrating the actions in the watershed. That's really what's happening. And so we need to look at these basins from a watershed perspective and look for where we can target interventions to have the most impact, whatever those interventions might be, whether they're stopping sediment or increasing flows or whatever. So we need to get really smart about the way that we do this so that we can recover and restore these ecosystems to the extent possible. Now, I think I've got about 4 or 5 more minutes. I wanted to talk about the Ogallala because it also touches Colorado and Wyoming and New Mexico in a significant way. Even though we're just on the edge of it, the amount of irrigation, for example, about 20% of Colorado's irrigation is on the Ogallala. A quarter of U.S. irrigation is Ogallala, okay? Think about that. That's pretty significant out there. It's a different story than the South Platte because it's really not about population growth. We're not growing the towns out there on the Ogallala. It's really about irrigated agriculture on a non-renewable water supply. That's really what this story is about. So do you guys know what we're growing with all that water out there on the Ogallala?
Corn.
Cows. Cows that eat corn. No. So, yeah, it's corn. But, I mean, if you look, this is a map of the feedlots on the Ogallala. And we're growing the nation's beef out there. And a lot of beef that's exported is grown out there on the Ogallala. It's pretty amazing. It's really a wonderful growing condition for both animals and for corn out there, so long as you have water. That's really the trick. And Thomas and others, boy, I just completely did something there. Actually, so Thomas and others, can you get me back to, thanks, showed these maps of declining aquifers. In the South Platte, in the Ogallala, these declines have been huge, right? We've seen declines up to 250,000 acre feet, that one right there, 250 feet below surface level. There's something I need to say here, though. So how are we going to get all the? You just have to go all the way through. You guys get to see my talk again? Yeah, I know. Sorry. Okay. So one thing about the Ogallala is I got to make this point because the people in Nebraska are really getting sick of us talking about how the Ogallala is just completely. Hey, Dick, am I out of time or what? My slideshow just gave up on me again.
Speaking of Nebraska, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. The wildlife of Nebraska. You want to try again? So, look, there's parts of the Ogallala that are actually rising in Nebraska, okay? So when you make these generalizations that the whole Ogallala, the groundwater is really a local resource, and Thomas talked about this. Even though that aquifer covers 8 states, what happens pretty locally. And of course, most of that development has been post-1960, right? I mean, almost all the world's groundwater development is post-World War II. And you think about what we've done with groundwater since World War II on this planet, it's pretty amazing. Hey, good job, Melissa. Thank you. Now I'm going to really go into hyperspeed and skip a few slides if this thing will let me. Okay. So let me just make this point. If you look at where the Ogallala Aquifer was pre-development, where it is today, we've drafted not quite 9% of the aquifer. Now, of course, that varies all over the place, but less than 10% of the aquifer. No problem, right? We got 90% left. We're good. Well, the problem, particularly from a natural resources point of view, is that's an arid land out there. And the streams that cut across the Ogallala that are really important for wildlife and lots of values out on those Great Plains, they ride on that aquifer. So you don't have to pull the aquifer down very far to where so instead of those streams gaining from the Ogallala, they're giving to the aquifer, actually to the alluvial, which then drains into the Ogallala. And so the real problem really comes in with this issue of ecosystem needs and services, and we've seen this issue of these plain streams declining due to pumping. And this is, this one right here is showing you the beaver from 1940 to 2000. Didn't take very long to pull that aquifer down to the point that these streams began to be a problem. Now, most of our compacts our interstate compacts didn't talk about groundwater. But what's happened, and the Republican River is a great example of the fight that Nebraska and Kansas and Colorado have had. They contemplated surface water, and we connected much later, 50, 70, 80 years later, surface and groundwater in those discussions. And to me, when you get to this question about sustainability for the Ogallala, I put a question mark there. Unlike the South Platte where I gave you a slide with solutions, I gave you a question mark on this one. And here's why. Here's what I would say about it is that sustainable groundwater levels are not a realistic goal in the Ogallala. It's, that's just not where we're going. I think that prolonging the life of the aquifer, that's a goal that we should have. Sustaining the rural communities that depend on the aquifer, that's a goal that we should have. But holding that groundwater level steady is probably not realistic. Why? Some of the work that we've done at CSU looking at where we are pumping right now and what a sustainable level would look like, we need to decrease pumping by about 75 to 80% on that aquifer to hold, to basically keep those plain streams intact and create the refuge that those fish need. And the economic forces are such that the transition from irrigated agriculture to dryland agriculture is not going to happen until it's unprofitable to pump, right? Until we pulled it down far enough that you're either too deep or your yield isn't enough. It's just not going to happen unless we intervene in some institutional way. And I guess that's part of what we can discuss in the Q&A. I think it's what makes sustainability considerations difficult for us in the Rocky Mountains is that, contrary to our development, to our historical practice, sustainability is not just about human needs, right? I think that's the real challenge. And I think, our rivers, those ecosystems, those wetlands all provide really important services. And I guess, the hope, I don't want to leave the idea that it's either or. It's either ag or ecosystems, or either people or ecosystems. But I think we have to talk about this, and we have to think really deeply about what systems can we protect, how do we do that, and sustain the growth and the food needs, etc. I do not see this as being simple to solve, but I think it's a question that we have to grapple with. And so I appreciate the fact that you all have organized this discussion today. So last couple of slides, really what the pathways to sustainability, what do I see? And I've got 10 of these bullet points of where I think we've got to go. Clearly it's going to take some policy and institutional changes at pretty much all of the levels to get us to sustainable water usage. And by that I mean federal, state, local, etc. And I'll give you a few ideas of what I think are some of those important ones. We've heard this over and over again today, sustainable groundwater utilization. I didn't get to tell you the story because my slideshow blew up about how we brought groundwater into prior appropriations in Colorado. It was super difficult. We started in 1957. We've just now gotten there in some of our river basins. It was painful, hurt a lot. Economic interests were lost. Prior appropriation in groundwater may be a conundrum. Maybe that's not the right way to do it. But by doing that, we actually got ourselves into some sustainable groundwater pumping situations in Colorado. I can say more about that in the questions later. Markets have come up several times. I don't see it as a panacea, but I see it as something really important. And the question was asked earlier about, how do you get these guys in Yuma with really senior rights to deal with efficiency and conservation? Create a market where they're going to make money for doing it, where it becomes profitable for them to do that. Those guys are smart. They're businessmen. So I see that as a solution. There's a lot of steps that we need, though, to get us to that place. And a bunch of these have been talked about. We've got to get our diversion, our use metered. We need to actually convert these rights to volumetric rights. There's a bunch of things that have to happen to get us to markets, and I don't have time to mention all that. But, we have some good market arrangements that are working in the West. We need to go further, and I think that gets us to some of the efficiencies that we're looking for. At the same time, I'm going to argue that I think we need some reasonable protections for agriculture. I think that if you look at the value of that water in agriculture and you compare it to the value of water in industry, oil and gas, municipal supply, cannot compete, cannot do it. And so if we value that food production capacity that we have, we're going to have to think about what do we do there to incentivize some of the things that we need to see happen. Water data and information systems, again, huge. We have to carefully measure and monitor the water that we're using in all sectors in order to have really efficient, effective markets, and also to manage and to basically enforce the regulations that we're trying to implement, and even to get us to this idea of sustainability. I believe there's a lot that can be done in basin-wide management that we're not doing. Somebody mentioned this early. water management is so balkanized in the West, you can't believe it. I mean, we have thousands of institutions, irrigation districts, conservation districts. I mean, the overlays of governance is Byzantine, I guess would be the right word. So we need to think about how we can begin to have some basin-wide management. Urban water conservation is a big part of it. I think that a lot of what these big cities are showing us is that they can grow within the water supply that they currently have. Now, does climate change and drought and those things scare them? Yes, scares them to death. But I think there's a lot that can be done there. And I think that, those charts that, it's one thing to look at supply. Then when you look at demand, and when you look at that chart like Doug showed, and you have demand or Sharon showed it, demand that's exceeding supply, that's aspirational demand, Doug. Right? That's want to be demand. I mean, you're not going to use more water than you have. You're going to pull it out of lower value uses is what you're going to do. So I think we're going to hear a talk tomorrow about growth management and land use planning. I think it's a big deal. We've got to look at that in the West from a lot of points of view. And what I see there that's pretty neat is that if you think about integrating water planning with growth management, there's all these benefits, right, in terms of energy, transportation. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done in our cities of the future that lighten our footprint, not just water, but in other places as well. I need to say something about infrastructure, and I skipped that. There's a lot of hand-wringing about the deferred infrastructure needs in the U.S., and it's an important point, okay? We've got an aged infrastructure in our water supply infrastructure. What I would submit to you guys is this is an amazing opportunity, if we do it right, to modernize the infrastructure, to make it more efficient, to lighten its footprint. And so this aging infrastructure may be the opportunity that we really need to change a lot of things in the West. And what I would say to you is that will happen if we plan for it. If we don't plan for it, what you'll see infrastructure fail, and we got to rebuild the pipe just like it was, or we got to rebuild the diversion just like it was. If we plan, we can think about how we rebuild the infrastructure in a way that allows fish passage, for crying out loud, or allows some of the things that we want to have happen. So I would just say it's an opportunity. Let's seize that opportunity to make things better. And then finally, I'm gonna end on a climate change note. I think that climate change for us in the West, it portends worse droughts, but it also portends wet periods. And I really get concerned about these calls for dam removals in the sake of sustainability. I know there's places where dam removals make sense, but we're going to need reservoirs in the West to operate our systems. And those reservoirs are going to give us degrees of freedom to get through drought in ways that don't hammer ecosystems, okay? They're going to give us water where we have flows and where cities can do what they need to do. So I guess what I would like to say is we need to have a sophisticated conversation about reservoirs and the need for them. I think somebody already said it. Most of the good reservoir sites have already been taken. Great. Let's take care of those. Let's value them. We're going to need to be able to store in the wet years in order to get through the dry years that are coming. And so the conversation about underground storage has been fascinating. There are some major institutional hurdles yet to get over. Arizona has gotten over some of them, but they've just been storing at this point. The real rubber will meet the road when the long-term drought comes as to how that all plays out. I see underground storage of excess flows as being a really important part of how we go forward in terms of sustaining, again, not just the human needs, but environmental and ecosystem needs as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you.